Hey guys, tonight we're going to do something both magical and honestly a little bit impractical. You're taking a moonlit stroll through the ancient city of Babylon. Yes, that Babylon. The one with legends attached, with kings who thought carving laws into giant stones was the ultimate flex, and with architecture so over the top that later Greek writers couldn't decide whether they'd actually seen it or just heard somebody exaggerating at a dinner party. You probably won't survive this stroll in real life. You'd need a time machine, a tetanus shot, and probably some serious bargaining skills in Akkadian. But don't worry, tonight it's all safe, slow, and strangely cozy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And since we're all traveling together, drop your location and your local time in the comments. I always love seeing where in the world you're listening from. It makes this sleepy caravan feel a little bit like its own global gathering. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air is warm as you shuffle forward. Sandals, or maybe just bare, dusty feet, pressing into the packed clay street. Ahead rises a sight that would have stopped travelers in their tracks nearly 3,000 years ago, the Ishtar Gate. It isn't just an entryway, it's a statement piece. Babylon's way of saying, welcome, you're about to be impressed, whether you like it or not. The first thing you notice is the color. Deep, glazed lapis blue bricks shimmer faintly even under the twilight sky, as if somebody has borrowed a slice of midnight and baked it into clay. Historians are pretty confident that these bricks were fired with a glaze containing precious minerals, which gave them their trademark glossy hue. It was a bold choice, considering most city walls in the ancient world looked like giant piles of beige bread loaves. But Babylon? Babylon was ready for the runway. Emblazoned across the surface in repetitive rows are striding lions. Their manes are stiff, their eyes piercing, and their paws stretched forward with the authority of creatures that clearly own this street. These lions represented the goddess Ishtar, patron of love, war, and a whole lot of complex emotions that don't sound like the most relaxing bedtime material, so we'll just say she was powerful. Some tiles also carried bulls and dragons, the mushusu, whose scaly bodies look suspiciously like someone had described a crocodile to an artist who had never actually seen one. You step closer, craning your neck back, and the gate towers above you. Estimates suggest it reached around 12 meters, or roughly 4 modern stories. And keep in mind, this was only one of several layers of gates. Think of it as a Babylonian version of airport security, only with more mythical animals and fewer confiscated water bottles. Passing beneath the arch, you can almost imagine the soundscape. The creak of wooden carts rolling on wheels banded with bronze, donkeys protesting every step, and merchants calling out to anyone within earshot. The echo inside the vaulted passage magnifies the noise, giving the whole thing the feel of a parade ground, which actually it was. This was part of the ceremonial approach, the stage where festivals like the New Year procession would roll through. Now, mainstream history fact here. We know that King Nebuchadnezzar II, yes, the same guy who shows up in the Old Testament for making life difficult for Jerusalem, commissioned this gate around the 6th century BCE. His inscription is baked into the walls, literally. Archaeologists found cuneiform texts beneath the bricks dedicating the structure to Ishtar and bragging about his achievement. It's the ancient version of slapping a brass plaque on a new library, except Nebuchadnezzar wasn't modest about it. For a quirkier tidbit, did you know the original lions, bulls, and dragons on the gate were once carefully painted in multiple colors, not just pale reliefs? That means the whole entrance glowed like an animated mural, part amusement park, part divine warning sign. Imagine approaching that after a month-long desert trek. You'd think you'd accidentally stumbled into a hallucination caused by heat stroke. And here's where scholars keep things spicy. Historians still argue whether ordinary people like you, well, you in sandals, actually got to wander freely through this majestic gate, or whether it was mostly restricted to ceremonial parades of priests and royalty. Some think it was both. On festival days, it was the communal highway. On ordinary days, the guards probably gave side-eye to anyone who looked too scruffy. Tonight, though, you're slipping in unnoticed, blending with the soft shuffle of a crowd that isn't actually there. As you pass under, the coolness of the bricks offers a relief from the heat lingering in the dusty air. The torchlight flickers across the glossy animals, and you wonder if anyone ever tried to polish these bricks like giant bathroom tiles. Probably not. It was a full-time job just keeping the city's thousands of mud brick walls from melting in the rain. Yes, Babylon had the same problem as every backyard clay project. Water is not your friend. The ground beneath you is wide, deliberately designed for processions. The processional way stretches ahead, but for now, you linger at the threshold. Travelers in antiquity would have paused here too, partly to marvel, partly because there's always some ancient equivalent of customs to get through. Maybe guards check your pack for contraband figs. Maybe they just glare at you for looking too touristy. You run your fingers across the brickwork, tracing grooves that were set thousands of years ago. Incredibly, parts of this very gate survive today, reconstructed in Berlin's Pergamon Museum. A chunk of Babylon has been transplanted into modern Europe, like someone ripping out a cathedral door and reassembling it in their living room. Seeing it there is surreal, but here, in your quiet night stroll imagination, you're standing at the original. Its towers intact, its colors vibrant, and its lions pacing forever forward. A child tugs at her mother's hand, pointing up at the dragons with wide eyes. Somewhere a dog barks, its nails clicking on the stones. And overhead, the stars of the Mesopotamian sky scatter like spilled grain. You can almost believe the entire scene is a deliberate composition, the universe itself conspiring to impress. You breathe in deep. The smell is clay, sweat, faint incense from a temple further down the road, and maybe, if you're lucky, the aroma of roasting onions from a vendor's pot. Babylon was a city of contradictions, sacred and sweaty, majestic and muddy. And it all begins here, with the Ishtar Gate, still pulling you in thousands of years later. Slowly, you step forward, deeper into the belly of the city, letting the lions watch you fade into the night. You leave the shadow of the Ishtar Gate behind, and immediately the space opens into something broader, something that feels like a stage set, not for one performance, but for the endless rhythm of a city's life. Before you stretches the processional way, Babylon's ceremonial artery. Think of it as a combination of parade route, main boulevard, and occasionally giant obstacle course when someone's donkey decides it doesn't want to move another inch. The road beneath your feet is surprisingly smooth, paved with carefully set limestone and baked bricks, a rare treat in a world where most people walked on dust or mud. The stones reflect faint light from oil lamps and torches, throwing gentle glimmers like water ripples. If you shuffle your sandals just right, you almost get the sense of skating, minus the part where you'd fall and ruin your best tunic. The processional way isn't narrow. It's wide enough that two ox-drawn carts could pass each other without one driver hurling Mesopotamian insults at the other. That alone makes it feel generous, but the width was also symbolic. When New Year festivals rolled around, this was the route for statues of gods, carried aloft on platforms, paraded before citizens, priests, and a carefully curated audience of awestruck visitors. The very stones you're dragging your tired feet across once bore divine cargo. No pressure. Your gaze drifts to the walls that line the street. These aren't blank, boring slabs. They're decorated with more glazed bricks, lions striding again in endless procession. It's almost hypnotic. Each animal a near clone of the last, but with just enough handcrafted difference that your eye picks up tiny variations in their expressions. Some lions look fierce. Some look like they'd rather be napping. Maybe you're projecting. Either way, the effect is impressive. Now, for a solid historical anchor, archaeologists discovered that the processional way was roughly 20 meters wide at its largest sections, and it stretched for over half a kilometer through the city. That's not just a fancy driveway. That's a civic statement. It said, "Our festivals are large, our gods are important, and yes, you will walk a long way before you get anywhere meaningful." For a quirkier tidbit, at one point, baked into the paving stones themselves, there were inscriptions with Nebuchadnezzar's name. Imagine that. Every step you took, you were literally walking on a royal brand logo. It's like he wanted to remind you that you were standing on his generosity, his power, and probably his tax money. Historians still argue whether those inscriptions were originally visible to pedestrians or whether they were tucked under protective layers, meant more for the gods' eyes than human ones. Either way, it's a flex that makes carving your initials into wet cement look downright amateur. The night hums around you as you wander. A couple of stray dogs trot past, tails wagging with the confidence of creatures who know exactly where to find dropped food when festival crowds pack the streets. From a nearby balcony, you catch laughter, maybe a lute twanging a cheerful tune. Life pulses here, not just ceremony. You get the sense that the processional way doubled as a casual meeting ground, the kind of place where you'd bump into a neighbor, exchange gossip, and complain about the latest decree from the palace. Your attention catches on the smell. Baked clay from the bricks, yes, but also something sweeter, a waft of incense from a side altar. It's said that during great festivals, priests would sprinkle fragrant resins along this road so that the entire path smelled like divine approval. Frankincense, myrrh, cedar resin, aromas strong enough to mask the less charming sense of livestock and sweaty humanity. Tonight, though, the air is calm, not crowded, and the scent drifts softly enough to feel like a background note. You pause and glance upward. Babylon wasn't shy about size. Towering walls line the avenue, some soaring several stories high. They seem almost theatrical, deliberately designed to make the road feel canyon-like, funneling attention forward toward temples and palaces. It's city planning with drama baked in. You're not just strolling a street, you're walking a narrative arc. A group of children scurry past you, giggling as they chase each other, bare feet slapping against stone. One trips, catches himself, and bolts off again without a pause. You can imagine parents shouting after them to be careful, though, really, isn't that the universal soundtrack of urban childhood? Somewhere further down the avenue, a drumbeat thuds. Not frantic, not alarming, just steady. Maybe a rehearsal for a ritual. Maybe just some street musicians getting a head start on tomorrow's entertainment. The acoustics here are strange. Sounds echo, bouncing off the glazed walls, layering themselves into something both intimate and grand. And as you continue down the processional way, you realize something. This road isn't designed for speed. It's wide enough, smooth enough, sure, but its very grandeur demands you slow down. You don't rush through a space like this. You meander. You look around. You notice the lions, the inscriptions, the architecture. It's the ancient version of forcing you to stop and admire the design, whether you're in the mood or not. Mainstream historians like to point out that Babylon, at its peak, was one of the largest cities in the world. Perhaps 200,000 people lived here. The processional way was their shared artery, Think of festival crowds swelling along its length, the press of bodies, the shuffle of sandals, the sound of hymns carried by priests and echoed by citizens. For a few days each year, this road was the cosmic highway, connecting humans and gods. And here you are, with the place practically to yourself. Of course, scholars still debate whether this kind of urban pageantry was truly inclusive. Did ordinary folk stand shoulder to shoulder with nobles, or were the best spots reserved for the elite, while the rest jostled at the margins? Tonight, at least, the hierarchy has dissolved. You're an honored guest, walking at your own pace. No guards rushing you, no priests ushering you along. You pause again to rest your feet, leaning against a cool stretch of wall. A crack runs through the glaze, chipped by centuries, but the lion about you still looks sharp enough to leap off the brick. You half smile, imagining it stretching, yawning, and then padding down the road in front of you. After all, in Babylon, who's to say myth and reality didn't occasionally blur? Another breeze rustles past, carrying the faint smell of date wine. Someone nearby is brewing, probably in one of the many taverns that cluster just off the main road. You make a mental note to check that out later, because nothing says ancient tourist like sipping fermented dates after a long walk. For now, though, you keep moving. Your steps echo softly, accompanied by the quiet crackle of torch flames. The road seems to guide you forward, deeper into the heart of Babylon, toward its markets and its mysteries. And though you know the city is sprawling, crowded, and sometimes overwhelming, at this moment it feels strangely gentle. Like the stones themselves are easing you along, whispering stories of gods, kings, and ordinary feet that walked here long before yours. The processional way narrows slightly as you drift further into the city, and almost without realizing it, you find yourself swept into the steady pulse of Babylon's markets. The scent is the first clue. Smoky fires, roasted grains, and something sweet, maybe figs stewing down into syrup. Then comes the sound. Voices calling, haggling, joking, layered one on top of the other until the air itself vibrates with chatter. You've stepped into the bazaar. The stalls aren't what you'd expect if you're imagining rows of neat wooden kiosks. These are mud brick alcoves and woven canopies, shaded with palm mats to keep the sun from melting both the merchants and their wares. Each one bursts with something different. To your left, baskets overflow with dates, their sticky skins catching the light. To your right, a cloth seller has draped dyed wool in vivid stripes of red, blue, and yellow, each piece rippling slightly whenever the evening breeze sneaks through. A donkey sneezes. You didn't even know donkeys could sneeze, but this one has just showered dust all over its owner's pile of garlic bulbs. The man swats at the animal, grumbles, then goes right back to pitching his produce. "Best garlic in Babylon," he insists, waving a bulb dangerously close to your face, as if you might buy it on impulse. Mainstream Fact Time really was a hub for trade. Because it sat near the Euphrates and at a crossroads of caravan routes, goods from as far away as Anatolia, Egypt, and even the Indus Valley might appear in its stalls. Merchants trafficked in copper, tin, cedarwood, and lapis lazuli. It wasn't just a local farmer's market. It was Amazon Prime, circa 600 BCE, though with more donkeys and fewer shipping guarantees. For a quirkier tidbit, there's some evidence that perfume sellers in Babylon sold concoctions made from sesame oil mixed with herbs and flowers. Which sounds lovely until you realize one recipe apparently included myrrh and goat hair. Yes, goat hair perfume. Nothing says I'm ready for date night quite like smelling faintly of livestock. Historians still argue whether average Babylonians could regularly afford luxuries from these stalls, or if much of what we picture belonged mostly to elites. Did the baker's apprentice ever splurge on a tiny jar of imported cinnamon, or was that fantasy reserved for nobles? Nobody can say for sure, but you decide. just for tonight, that the market is open to you, no matter how scuffed your sandals are. You wander deeper, weaving between stalls. One woman sits cross-legged behind baskets of lentils, scooping them out with a clay bowl into whatever container customers bring, jars, cloth sacks, even bare hands if they're desperate. She shouts her prices with the confidence of someone who's been bargaining all her life. And when a customer complains, she laughs and shrugs. Prices here aren't fixed. They're part of the game. Nearby, a potter has lined up rows of freshly fired bowls, their rims uneven, but their surfaces gleaming. He offers you one for a couple of copper coins. You run your fingers along its edge, pretending you're seriously considering it, though you know carrying fragile pottery through a crowded street is the ancient equivalent of walking home with a bag of chips already ripped open. Still, you smile politely and move on. Children dart between legs, chasing each other with bits of string and tiny clay toys. One boy runs past, clutching what looks like a miniature bull figurine, its horns comically oversized. He nearly collides with you, mutters something sheepish, and vanishes into the crowd before you can react. Apparently, Babylonian kids invented collectibles long before trading cards. The sounds of metal jewelry, the sizzle of frying onions, the slosh of beer being poured into clay mugs. Someone sings, badly but with enthusiasm. Someone else curses loudly when a jug tips over and soaks their sandals. You can't catch every word of the Akkadian dialect swirling around you, but the tones are universal: exasperation, amusement, persuasion. It's the eternal soundtrack of buying and selling. You pause at a spice merchant's stall. Wooden bowls hold tiny piles of powders, deep orange saffron threads, earthy cumin, and something sharp that makes you sneeze just looking at it. The merchant grins, clearly pleased at your reaction. He assures you, through gestures more than words, that this powder can cure headaches, bad luck, and probably heartbreak too. You nod politely, because disagreeing with a spice merchant feels unwise. A few steps further on, you find cloths hanging like banners, dyed indigo and patterned with geometric shapes. The dye seeps slightly unevenly, leaving clouds of darker and lighter shades, but the overall effect is mesmerizing. A woman runs her hand lovingly over one piece, sighing as though she's already imagining herself in a dress made from it. She argues with the seller for a long time, walking away, coming back, walking away again. You smile, realizing some things in markets never change. Overhead, the sky deepens into a dusky purple. Oil lamps are being lit one by one, perched on niches in the walls, sending warm pools of light across the stalls. The market doesn't shut down at sunset. It simply shifts mood, becoming softer, sleepier, but no less alive. Somewhere in the crowd, you hear the jangle of small bells. A man is carrying a tray of trinkets, bronze amulets shaped like protective spirits, tiny clay charms stamped with cuneiform signs. He tries to sell you one that promises to ward off scorpions. You almost laugh, remembering that you haven't seen a single scorpion all night. Then again, maybe that means the amulets work. Clever marketing, Babylon style. Your stomach growls, and it's no wonder. The smells here are relentless. Someone is grilling lamb skewers over charcoal, brushing them with a sauce that smells both sweet and sharp. Another vendor offers flatbreads straight from the oven, puffed and steaming, slapped onto a clay surface that hisses every time dough touches it. You're tempted to stop and eat, but something in you wants to keep the stroll going, letting the aromas guide you deeper. As you move along, you notice a shift. Fewer luxury items, more everyday goods. Baskets of onions, piles of fish, bundles of reeds. Ordinary people buying ordinary things. The pace is less frantic here. Shoppers pause to chat, to compare prices, to complain about their neighbors. You hear laughter when one man tries to lift a jar far too heavy for him, wobbling until a friend comes to help. It's comforting, really, this glimpse of everyday life. Babylon might have been famous for its kings, its ziggurats, its gates and gardens, but for most people, this was the city. Stalls, gossip, the rhythm of trade. And here you are, weaving through it all, unnoticed, just another shadow in the night. At last, you reach the far edge of the bazaar. Behind you, the chatter hums on, voices mingling like the tide. Ahead, the streets narrow toward the water, where canals shimmer faintly under the moon. But before you leave, you take one last glance back at the marketplace. The woven mats, the baskets of fruit, the lions still pacing silently on the processional way walls above. It feels alive, timeless, and strangely familiar. You take a breath, savoring the mix of smoke and spice, and step forward toward the sound of running water. The market sounds fade behind you, replaced by a quieter rhythm, the trickle and splash of water moving where you least expect it. At first, you think it's the Euphrates itself, but no. As you follow the narrowing lane, you find yourself standing before one of Babylon's many canals, shimmering softly in the moonlight. It cuts straight through the city like a vein of liquid silver, its surface dappled with faint ripples where frogs plop and fish rise to snap at insects. This isn't some decorative feature. Babylon's canals are its lifeblood, the reason this desert city manages to thrive. Without them, the fields would bake into cracked clay, and the city's famed gardens would wither into dust. The Babylonians knew it too, and they engineered with a kind of stubborn genius. They carved channels from the Euphrates, lined them with bricks, and regulated them with gates and sluices, like veins and arteries carrying the very pulse of the empire. Nebuchadnezzar II bragged in his inscriptions about restoring Babylon's canals, digging new ones, and making sure water flowed year-round. He wasn't exaggerating. Archaeologists have found evidence of massive canal networks stretching far into the countryside, delivering irrigation to fields of barley, bunions, and date palms. Babylon wasn't just a city, it was the hub of an entire watery machine. For a quirkier tidbit, there's a claim from later Greek writers that some Babylonians even experimented with floating gardens on rafts, tethering them in the canals so that herbs and flowers could grow while bobbing gently in the current. It sounds half like a practical solution and half like something you'd see at a modern hipster farmer's market. Organic canal-grown basil, hand-paddled daily. And here's the open debate part. Historians still argue whether the canal system was primarily for agriculture or whether it doubled as a kind of highway, carrying boats deep into the city itself. Clay tablets describe shipments of grain and dates moving by water, but some scholars wonder if smaller canals actually reached right into neighborhoods, with families stepping off their stoops onto little boats the way Venetians do today. No one's entirely sure, but standing here, you can almost picture it. Narrow wooden skiffs gliding under starlight, paddles dipping softly, families waving from the banks. You kneel by the edge, trailing your fingers in the water. It's cool, cleaner than you expected, and moving fast enough to keep from going stagnant. Somewhere down the canal, a boat glides into view. It's squat, built of reeds bound together and sealed with bitumen, tar seeping between the seams. The boatman stands at the stern, poling with a long stick, pushing the vessel forward with practiced grace. His cargo is humble, bundles of reeds stacked high, but his movements are steady, almost hypnotic. A splash makes you look closer. Fish dart through the shadows, some no bigger than your hand, others longer, their scales flashing like coins. Babylonian fishermen relied on these canals for much of their diet, drying fish on mats, salting them, selling them right back at those market stalls you just left. You can almost imagine the taste. Salty, chewy, maybe not exactly five-star dining, but enough to sustain thousands. The banks of the canal are busy even at this hour. A woman bends to fill a clay jar, the muscles in her arms flexing as she hoists it back onto her shoulder. A boy follows behind, carrying a smaller jar with both hands, nearly staggering under its weight. On the opposite bank, a man rinses his tools, the clink of bronze against stone carrying across the water. This isn't leisure space, it's work, necessity, survival. And yet, as you walk along, you notice little hints of beauty woven in. Clay lamps float on the water, tiny flames flickering as they drift, set loose perhaps as offerings or simply for light. The reflections dance across the rippling surface, creating the illusion of stars scattered in liquid. It's both practical and poetic, like much of Babylonian engineering, designed to feed the body but soothing to the mind as well. You stop at a low bridge, its surface made of timbers lashed together. Crossing, you notice how the wood creaks under your steps. A cart rumbles over just ahead, pulled by two oxen that seem entirely unimpressed with the effort. The driver urges them forward, wheels clattering loudly, until the sound fades back into the night. The smell here is different from the market. Less spice, more earth and water. The dampness carries hints of mud, reeds, and wet clay. It's not unpleasant. In fact, it cuts through the dry desert air, refreshing in its own way. You breathe deeply, imagining what it must have been like for farmers to depend on this scent, knowing that each whiff of moist soil meant crops could grow, children could eat, the city could thrive. A little further along, you spot something unusual, an irrigation gate. Thick wooden planks slot into a brick frame, raised and lowered with ropes to control the flow. A couple of workers fiddle with the ropes, adjusting the level so that water pours off into a side channel, trickling away toward unseen fields. They grunt with effort, the ropes creaking as they shift. When they finish, one wipes his brow, nods in satisfaction, and slaps his companion on the shoulder. Job well done. The gate reminds you of how precarious this whole system was. Too much water and the fields flooded. Too little and crops withered. Control was everything. The Babylonians had no computers, no fancy sensors, just muscle, observation, and generations of trial and error. And somehow they managed. They turned a desert into the breadbasket of an empire. Another boat passes. This one carrying not reeds, but people. 3 men with shaved heads and long robes chanting softly. Priests, maybe, or scribes traveling together. Their voices drift across the canal like a low hum, blending with the splash of paddles. You pause, listening, and though you can't make out the words, the tone is soothing, almost lulling you into stillness. You lean on the bridge rail, letting the night settle. Behind you lies the bustle of the bazaar. Ahead waits the hum of workshops and the glow of homes. But here, by the canal, time feels slower, like the city's pulse has softened. You watch the water, the ripples spreading outward, carrying reflections of torches, boats, and stars alike. For just a moment, you wonder what it would be like to live with this sound every night. The steady trickle outside your window, the occasional creak of a passing boat, the comfort of knowing that water, so scarce in the wider desert, runs at your doorstep. And then, with one last glance at the shimmering canal, you step off the bridge and continue, letting the sound follow you as you move deeper into the city's maze. The water's song fades behind you as you slip back into the dry hush of streets lined with brick. The night has grown deeper, though Babylon shows no sign of sleeping. Ahead, you catch the dull glow of fires, the sharp clink of hammers, and the rhythmic scrape of tools. You've wandered into the craftsman's quarter, the beating, tinkering heart of the city. At first, it's the potters you notice. Their workshops spill onto the street, lit by flickering lamps that turned wet clay into gleaming silhouettes. A man crouches over a spinning wheel, his hands steady as he coaxes a lump of earth into the delicate curve of a jar. The wheel squeaks faintly with every turn, hypnotic, like the slow tick of a clock. Around him, rows of drying vessels stand at attention, their rims still damp. Some are simple cups, meant for beer. Others are larger jars, wide-bellied, the kind that might hold grain or oil for months. You step close enough to see his fingers leave faint grooves on the surface, fingerprints that will outlast his own lifetime, baked solid once the pieces hit the kiln. Mainstream historical fact: Babylonian potters were masters of kiln technology. They fired vessels at high, controlled temperatures, often using two-chambered kilns to direct heat evenly. Some pots still survive today, thousands of years later, dug from the soil with their curves intact. Not bad for mud shaped in the dark of a workshop. A quirkier tidbit here: archaeologists once uncovered a clay tablet with a recipe for brewing beer scratched onto it, alongside doodles of jugs. It's almost like a potter got distracted mid-lesson and started sketching merchandise. You can imagine one of these men not just shaping jars, but also gossiping about which tavern sold the strongest brew to put inside them. Historians still argue whether workshops like these were small family businesses passed down generation to generation, or whether they were more like state-controlled operations feeding into massive palace stores. Did every potter carve out a living independently, or were some just one cog in Nebuchadnezzar's imperial supply chain? You walk between the stalls, noticing both modest homes attached to them and larger communal kilns, and realize maybe the answer is both. The air grows warmer as you pass the metalworkers. Here, the glow is fiercer, orange flames licking up from furnaces that roar with the bellows' breath. Men hammer strips of bronze on anvils, each strike ringing like a heartbeat through the street. Sparks spit and vanish into the night. Tools hang neatly on walls: chisels, pliers, tongs. A young apprentice scurries between masters, carrying lumps of copper, his face streaked with soot and determination. You pause to watch a smith hammering what looks like the blade of a short dagger. His strokes are steady, rhythmic, like drumming. He dunks the glowing metal into a trough of water, and steam bursts upward in a hiss that stings your nose. He doesn't look up. His whole body is focused, his craft second nature. Somewhere nearby, the scent shifts, less metallic, more sweet. You follow it and find a workshop where reeds are stacked in piles. Inside, two men sit cross-legged, splitting and weaving them into mats. One pauses, testing the tightness with a tug, then nods. These mats will end up everywhere, covering roofs, shading stalls, even lining boats. They're simple, yes, but essential, the kind of craft that keeps the city stitched together. And then, tucked in a quieter corner, you find the scribes. Their workshop doesn't glow with fire, it glows with lamplight and the soft rustle of styluses pressed into clay. Men sit at low tables, wet tablets in front of them, carving wedge-shaped marks that look like tiny bird tracks frozen mid-flight. A boy carries a stack of fresh clay slabs from a basin, his arms trembling with the weight. Another carefully sets finished tablets on a shelf to dry, where they'll harden into the city's permanent memory. Mainstream fact again: Babylonian scribes trained for years to master cuneiform. They weren't just writers, they were accountants, record keepers, and bureaucrats, recording everything from temple donations to beer rations. Their work turned the messy sprawl of Babylon into something trackable, something governable. For the quirky detail, one surviving Babylonian tablet is literally a complaint letter about a bad delivery of copper. It's the world's oldest customer service rant, chiseled forever into clay. You picture one of these scribes muttering under his breath as he records it. Great, another guy upset about his copper. This job will be the death of me. And of course, scholars debate just how widely literacy reached. Was it only the elite trained in temple schools? Or did ordinary craftsmen and merchants pick up enough to scrawl their own notes, leaving professional scribes to handle the fancy stuff? You glance at the apprentices here, some already carving neat little lines, others scratching crooked marks, and realize the question still lingers unanswered.
The street carries you past carpenters shaping planks of date palm, their saws rasping through the night. You see weavers stretching threads across wooden looms, pulling patterns tight until cloth shimmers with geometric designs. You pass a leather worker rubbing oil into sandals, then squint as a jeweler bends over tiny beads of lapis lazuli, stringing them into a necklace that glints faintly even under weak firelight.
Everywhere you look, there's motion, rhythm, repetition. These are the sounds of life, less grand than the processional way, less imposing than the Ishtar Gate, but no less important. Without these hands, Babylon's walls would crumble. Its people go barefoot. Its gods stand in empty temples. You stop at a stall where a man is carving a small figure out of clay. It's rough, barely the size of your palm, but shaped into the form of a squat little protective spirit, tongue sticking out in defiance. He sets it aside to dry with a dozen others, each one slightly different. These will hang in doorways or sit in corners, guarding households from illness or bad luck. You smile. Ancient Babylon had knickknacks too. Forget Funko Pops, they had clay demons.
The air here is thick, hot, but strangely comforting. Each craft adds its own layer. The smoke of kilns, the metallic tang of bronze, the damp earthiness of clay, the dry sweetness of reeds. Together they form a perfume that is uniquely Babylon, the scent of creation itself. You realize, walking through these workshops, that the city's grandeur isn't just in its kings or its myths. It's here, in the steady hum of hands shaping earth, fire, and reed into the objects of daily life. You let the sounds wash over you, the ring of hammers, the scrape of styluses, the whir of spinning wheels. And for a moment, it feels like the whole city is breathing in sync, one giant workshop crafting itself into being.
Finally, as you leave the quarter behind, the glow of fires fades, replaced again by the softer light of homes and courtyards. But you carry with you the rhythm of the craftsmen, their invisible fingerprints pressed into every jar, every mat, every wall you'll see from here on. The clang of the workshops drifts away behind you, replaced by a softer chorus. Low voices, the splash of water poured into basins, the occasional bark of a dog, reminding everyone that the night still belongs partly to animals. You've wandered into the residential heart of Babylon, where mud brick homes line the narrow lanes like cubes stacked neatly in rows. It feels quieter here, though not entirely still. A city of 200,000 people never truly sleeps. The first thing you notice is the uniformity. Most houses are built of the same sun-dried mud bricks, pale beige in daylight, but now glowing warmly under torchlight. They rise 2 stories high in places, with flat roofs that double as patios. Ladders lean up against them, waiting for families to climb after supper to catch the breeze. You picture kids racing up there, playing games until their parents scold them down to bed. Closer to ground level, you catch glimpses through open doorways and courtyards. Some are little more than single-room huts, with mats on the floor and a clay jar in the corner. Others reveal shaded courtyards ringed with rooms, palm trees swaying softly, vines creeping along mud-plastered walls. Even here, status makes its mark. One family has nothing but a reed mat for a door. Another boasts a carved wooden panel decorated with symbols of protective spirits. Babylonian homes were often built around a central courtyard. This courtyard wasn't just decorative, it was the household's lung, letting in air and light, a space for cooking, washing, gossiping, and sleeping during hot nights. Archaeologists have even found remains of small ovens tucked into these yards, suggesting dinner was as much an outdoor affair as an indoor one. For a quirkier tidbit, records show that some Babylonian households used crocodile dung as a form of sunscreen. Yes, really! Someone at some point must have smeared the stuff on their skin and thought, this works. You glance around these courtyards and wonder which family tried it first.
Hopefully not the one currently roasting onions, because that combination of smells would be memorable.
And here's where the scholarly debate sneaks in. Historians still argue whether most homes had private wells, or whether water was fetched communally from canals and fountains. Clay tablets list disputes over water rights, which suggests not everyone had equal access. You peer into one courtyard and see a jar freshly filled, condensation beating on its surface, while across the lane another woman lugs a heavy vessel home from farther away. It's a reminder that even in a city of wonders, survival involved endless trips for the basics.
You continue wandering. The streets are narrower here, some barely wide enough for two people to pass shoulder to shoulder. Shadows pool between high walls, and lamps flicker from niches near doorways. A man sits cross-legged on his threshold, sharpening a knife slowly against a whetstone. He glances up as you pass, but says nothing, his eyes weary but calm. Across from him, two women lean against a wall, whispering in low voices, breaking into laughter every few moments. You don't need to understand Akkadian to know that gossip transcends time.
The smells are different too. Less incense, more stew. From one open doorway, a wave of fragrance drifts out. Lentils simmering with garlic, a faint whiff of coriander. Your stomach grumbles, and you imagine a family gathered inside, dipping flatbread into the pot, chatting over the day's errands. Another house smells of freshly baked bread, the loaves cooling on a mat while a child tries, and fails, to sneak one. A dog trots past you, tail wagging, before settling down near a doorway where scraps have been tossed. Its ears twitch at every sound, but its eyes half close in comfort. Babylonian dogs weren't just guards. They were companions, often buried with their owners, sometimes even painted on protective amulets. This one seems perfectly content, as if the city itself belongs to him. You pause when you see a ladder leading up to a flat roof. Climbing it in your imagination, you find yourself standing above the lane, looking across a patchwork of rooftops. Families are scattered here, enjoying the cool air. Some lie on mats, staring up at the stars. Others chat in groups, cups of beer in hand, their voices carrying gently through the night. A woman hums a lullaby, rocking her child as the breeze tugs at her veil. It feels oddly intimate, like you've stumbled into hundreds of living rooms all at once. Mainstream fact: roofs really were multi-purpose spaces in Mesopotamia. People used them to dry crops, store goods, and sleep in summer. They were the ancient equivalent of both a pantry and a porch. If you wanted to spot your neighbor's laundry or sneak a glance at their garden, the roof was the perfect vantage point. For a quirky touch, there's evidence that some families even kept pigeons on their rooftops. Imagine the cooing blending with the hum of conversation, a chorus of wings fluttering every time a child clapped too loudly. You almost hear it now, soft feathers rustling against the star-speckled dark. Of course, scholars still debate just how private these homes really felt. The lanes were so close, the rooftops so open, that privacy must have been rare. Did neighbors constantly peek at each other? Did voices carry every whispered secret? Or did a kind of unspoken agreement exist? We all live stacked together, so let's pretend not to notice. No clear answer survives, but standing here, you suspect both were true, depending on the night. Descending the ladder, you step again into the narrow street. A boy runs past, clutching a clay toy in the shape of a chariot, his laughter echoing until he disappears. Behind you, a door creaks open, and a woman tosses out dishwater, narrowly missing your feet. She mutters something, probably the Babylonian equivalent of "watch out," before retreating inside. City life, you realize, was never spotless, no matter how grand the walls outside looked. You wander past another courtyard where a group of men sit cross-legged, playing a board game by lamplight. The grid scratched into the ground looks familiar. It could be the royal game of a Mesopotamian ancestor of backgammon. Dice clatter, pieces move, and laughter bursts when one player groans dramatically. You can't help but smile. Thousands of years may separate you, but game night frustration feels timeless. The deeper you walk, the more the hum of domestic life surrounds you. A mother scolds her children in sharp tones, then immediately softens, drawing one into her lap. A man leads a goat into a side courtyard, tethering it for the night. Somewhere, faint singing rises, maybe a prayer, maybe just someone practicing scales. All of it mingles into a gentle symphony of survival, ordinary, unpolished, yet steady as the heartbeat of the city. At last, you pause in a small square where several lanes meet. A fig tree grows here, its leaves rustling softly, its fruit just out of reach. Beneath it, two neighbors argue about something trivial, perhaps a boundary line, perhaps the borrowing of a jar. Their gestures are animated, but their tones carry more exasperation than anger. Tomorrow, you suspect, they'll be back to sharing bread. The square feels calm, though. Torches flicker, shadows sway, and the stars overhead gleam with quiet indifference. For all Babylon's grandeur, for its gates, its palaces, its myths, this is where its soul really lives. In mud-brick walls, shared courtyards, whispered gossip, and the steady rhythm of ordinary lives, tucked inside extraordinary history. Your footsteps take you farther from the sleepy courtyards and into a livelier stretch of street. The scent hits first, warm, yeasty bread fresh from clay ovens, followed by the tang of roasted onions and the faint sourness of fermented grain. Your stomach reacts instantly, and you realize it's been a long night of wandering. Good news! Babylon, even after dark, has places where you can pause for a meal. The bad news? You'll probably spill half of it on your tunic. Some things never change. A small crowd gathers near a doorway where laughter spills louder than the smoke. Inside, you glimpse the glow of a tavern. These were not glamorous establishments. They were simple, dimly lit rooms, usually run by women, where people came to drink beer, eat bread, and swap stories. You duck inside and instantly feel the shift. The air is thick with chatter, the smell of grain brew, and the faint musk of sweat mixed with smoke. Beer was the Babylonian drink of choice, safer than water and brewed in dozens of varieties. It was often drunk through long straws to filter out floating bits of grain and husk. You spot a group at a low table, leaning over a large clay jar, sipping together from reeds stuck into its frothy surface. A communal beer bucket. Nothing screams civilization like sharing straws with your neighbors. The tavern keeper, a sharp-eyed woman with arms folded, watches the room. She nods to you, then slides a flat loaf of bread across the counter, still warm, its edges blistered from the oven. You tear into it, crumbs scattering. It's dense, hearty, the kind of bread meant to fill stomachs fast. Paired with the bitter, slightly sour beer she ladles into your cup, it makes a meal that's both simple and strangely satisfying. Quirky tidbits, tablets suggest taverns sometimes doubled as gossip hubs and matchmaking spots, where people came not just to drink, but to meet lovers or arrange marriages. In other words, Babylonian taverns were part pub, part dating app. You look around. Two men are laughing too loudly, a couple in the corner leans closer than necessary, and a lute player in the back is strumming a tune that's either romantic or terribly out of tune, probably both. And here's the debate. Historians still argue whether taverns were frowned upon by the authorities or quietly tolerated. Some texts paint tavern keepers as disreputable, accusing them of watering down beer or running shady side businesses. Others suggest they were vital community centers, especially for those who couldn't afford lavish private feasts. You sip from your cup, wondering if your choice tonight marks you as a respectable traveler or a lowlife. Either way, you're eating, so who cares? Leaving the tavern, you step into the street again, following your nose. The market stalls you passed earlier in daylight now run on a smaller scale. Vendors sit under oil lamps, selling skewers of grilled fish, bowls of lentils, and piles of dates sticky with syrup. One man waves a handful of figs at you, his smile wide and toothy, promising they're the sweetest in Babylon. You buy a few, sinking your teeth into soft flesh that melts with sugary richness. Honestly, not a bad dessert course.
You pause to watch another vendor ladle out a thick stew from a bronze pot. The smell is heavenly. Onions, garlic, and leeks swimming in broth, with chunks of lamb bobbing lazily. He sprinkles crushed herbs on top, probably coriander or cumin, both beloved here. Customers eat with their hands, scooping the stew up with hunks of flatbread. You consider joining them, but the memory of that tavern beer still swirls in your stomach. Maybe later.
Babylonian recipes survive on clay tablets, some of the oldest cookbooks in history. They describe stews flavored with onions, leeks, garlic, and herbs, flavors you'd recognize instantly today. Some even mention garnishing dishes, which proves foodies existed thousands of years before Instagram. For the quirky side note, you recall one recipe that casually called for cooking the meat until it is done. No time, no temperature, just that vague instruction. Thanks, ancient chef. Your guess is as good as theirs. Somewhere, a Babylonian cook was probably rolling his eyes at beginners asking how long to boil goat stew. Scholars still argue how widespread such cuisine was. Were these fancy dishes only for the wealthy, while common folk stuck to bread and onions? Or did everyone occasionally taste the good stuff during festivals and feasts? You chew another fig and glance at the modest stalls here, realizing the answer might lie somewhere in the middle. You continue walking and stumble upon a small shop where a man brews a drink other than beer, date wine. It's syrupy, sticky, and sweet enough to make your teeth ache, but locals sip it with pleasure. He pours you a taste, and you nearly cough from its thickness. You thank him politely and set the cup aside, grateful for the experience, but unwilling to finish the dental hazard. Another smell wafts in. Roasted chickpeas, crunchy and salted. A boy carries them in a basket, shouting in the lane, selling handfuls wrapped in leaves. Street food, Babylon style. You buy some, munching as you walk, the crunch echoing between your teeth. They're addictive, the kind of snack you swear you'll stop eating after one more handful, and then suddenly the basket is empty. At one corner, you spot a group gathered around a traveling cook. He flips flatbread on a hot griddle, then spoons beans and herbs on top, folding it into a kind of ancient wrap. The crowd waits impatiently, hands outstretched. You catch yourself thinking, this is basically Mesopotamian fast food. Somewhere, a Babylonian teenager is arguing with his mom about why he needs 2 wraps instead of 1. Babylonian meals often relied on barley, not just for bread and beer, but as porridge and thickened soups. It was the backbone of their diet. The average Babylonian probably ate barley in some form every single day. Tonight, you've had bread, beer, and likely a porridge-based snack. Congratulations, you've officially joined the tradition. For the quirky tidbit, archaeologists once found traces of what might have been early cheesemaking in Mesopotamia. So yes, it's possible someone in Babylon was spreading cheese onto their bread millennia before grilled cheese sandwiches were cool. Sadly, nobody wrote down the recipe. And here's another debate. Did taverns and food stalls cater mostly to men, or did women join in? Some sources imply taverns were male-dominated, while others suggest female tavern keepers and possibly patrons were common. You glance back toward the tavern you left, remembering the woman at the counter, and realize that, once again, history's answers aren't as neat as we'd like them to be. By now, your belly is comfortably full, the sharp edge of hunger softened by bread, figs, and chickpeas. The streets smell rich with the night's feasting, roast meats, fried onions, sweet dates. But the buzz of the market is starting to fade. Vendors pack up, sweeping crumbs into baskets, dousing lamps one by one. Somewhere behind you, a man sings drunkenly as he stumbles home, his reed straw tucked behind his ear like a badge of honor. You lean against a wall, taking in the hum of satisfied voices drifting through the neighborhood. Eating here isn't just about food, it's about connection. Sharing a jar of beer, swapping gossip over stew, bargaining too hard for figs, and sneaking bites of bread under a roof full of laughter. Babylon may be remembered for its ziggurats and palaces, but tonight you've tasted its heartbeat, one crumb at a time. The market's chatter dwindles as you wander deeper into the city. The smells of bread and roasted onions fade, replaced by a different perfume altogether. Sweet, resinous smoke curling through the air, mingled with faint chanting. You've arrived near the great temples of Babylon, where the spiritual heartbeat of the city thrums steadily, even in the quiet hours of the night. Before you stands the shadowy outline of a massive ziggurat, its stepped layers stacked like a mountain built by human hands. Torches flicker along its base, casting long, wavering lines upward, as though the flames themselves are trying to climb to the gods. The ground trembles faintly under your sandals, not from any quake, but from the deep drums beating rhythmically inside the precinct walls. Someone, somewhere, is keeping time with the cosmos. Mainstream historical fact, temples in Babylon weren't just places of prayer. They were economic and political powerhouses. They owned land, stored grain, and employed armies of priests, scribes, and workers. The Great Ziggurat of Babylon, often associated with the legendary Tower of Babel, was called Edemenanki, the house of the foundation of heaven and earth. At its peak, it may have soared nearly 300 feet, an artificial mountain reaching into the sky. You step through an open gateway, greeted by a wash of incense that stings your eyes before settling into your lungs like thick perfume. The courtyard ahead is wide, its stones warm underfoot from the day's sun. A small group of priests in linen robes shuffle across, carrying vessels of oil and trays of offerings, bread, fruit, even the occasional roasted goat. They move with quiet precision, as though the gods are watching their every step. A quirky tidbit drifts into your memory. Some temples kept sacred meals for the gods, where food was carefully laid out before statues. Of course, the gods didn't actually eat it, the priests did after the ritual. So yes, you could technically say Babylonian gods had the best catered dinners in the city, with leftovers enjoyed by their attendants. You glance at the offerings now and wonder which priest will be sneaking an extra fig once the chanting dies down. The chants grow louder as you approach. You slip closer, hugging the shadow of a column, and see a ceremony unfolding. A statue of Marduk, Babylon's chief deity, gleams under torchlight. Its golden face seems almost alive, the polished eyes glinting as if in judgment. Priests bow low before it, waving bundles of reeds dipped in water, sprinkling droplets across the stone floor. The sound is soft, rhythmic, like rain falling on the earth. Historians still argue whether these rituals were more about devotion or politics. Was the statue a true vessel for the god, or was it more like a symbol of the king's power, a reminder that Babylon's rulers had divine approval? You watch the procession of priests, their movements carefully choreographed, and realize it may have been both. For the worshiper, it was devotion. For the king, it was legitimacy. Either way, the gods always got their incense. You wander to a quieter side of the temple precinct where smaller shrines line the walls. Here, ordinary citizens bring offerings. A woman kneels before a low altar, placing a handful of dates on a dish. Her lips move silently, eyes closed in concentration. Beside her, a man ties a clay figurine of a demon to a post, then smashes another one at his feet, as if symbolically destroying illness or bad luck. Rituals here are personal, messy, improvised compared to the grandeur inside the main sanctuary, and yet they feel no less powerful. The smell of burning cedar wood drifts toward you, sharp and clean, mixed with the faint sweetness of myrrh. Somewhere, a priest beats a drum in a slow, steady rhythm, each thud echoing like a heartbeat. A few worshippers sway with the sound, their hands lifted, voices murmuring in unison. It's hypnotic. You feel your own breath syncing with the beat, your steps slowing to match the cadence. Babylonian religion was polytheistic, with a vast pantheon including Marduk, Ishtar, Shamash, and Nabu. Each had their own temples, festivals, and cults woven into every aspect of life. Farmers prayed for fertile fields, soldiers for victory, scribes for wisdom. No part of the city moved without glancing upward first. For the quirky aside, Ishtar, goddess of love and war, had rituals that baffled ancient and modern observers alike. Some sources describe priests dressing as women or women as men during her festivals, blurring gender boundaries. You wonder if somewhere in these temple grounds, a priest is slipping into a costume, smirking at the scandalized looks of outsiders, while the locals shrug, "That's just Ishtar for you." And here's a debate scholars can't quite settle. Was the ziggurat itself a temple where people prayed, or was it more symbolic, a cosmic ladder meant only for priests and gods? Ordinary citizens might never have climbed its steps at all. You crane your neck upward, staring at the dark silhouette against the stars, and realize the answer has been swallowed by centuries. You move on, finding a corner where scribes scratch notes onto wet clay tablets by lamplight. They record offerings, tallying which citizen gave what, ensuring that devotion is not only spiritual, but properly accounted. One priest mutters to himself as he lists goats, loaves, and jars of beer. Somewhere, there's probably a whole tablet devoted to missing incense sticks, find responsible party. Even the gods had paperwork. At another corner, musicians sit cross-legged, plucking lutes and tapping drums to accompany the chants. The notes are slow, almost mournful, rising and falling like the breath of the temple itself. A child nearby yawns, tugging at his mother's robe, clearly less impressed by divine ceremony than by the thought of warm bread waiting at home. You linger at the edge of the precinct, absorbing the atmosphere. The flicker of lamps, the weight of incense, the hum of ritual. It feels timeless, heavy, and strangely calming. For all its grandeur, there's comfort in the predictability. Light the fire, sprinkle the water, chant the words, offer the bread. The gods are vast, but the people know exactly how to keep them pleased. As you step back into the street, the sounds fade, replaced once again by the quieter buzz of night. Yet the scent of incense clings to your tunic, a reminder that in Babylon, the divine isn't tucked away in distant myths. It walks with you, threaded into every loaf of bread, every drop of beer, every brick stacked in the city's walls. You leave behind the smoky sweetness of incense, letting the temple walls fade into the night. The hum of chants lingers like a faint echo in your ears, but ahead, a new sound draws you onward, the gentle scrape of styluses against wet clay. It's not as loud as the hammering of smiths or the laughter of taverns. This sound is softer, yet it carries a weight all its own, the weight of memory. You've wandered into the domain of the scribes and their libraries. The street opens into a quieter courtyard, lit by oil lamps flickering on shelves lined with clay tablets. At first glance, it doesn't look like much. No towering walls of scrolls, no endless parchment rolls, just stacks of mud bricks covered in wedge-shaped marks. But step closer, and you realize each tablet is a frozen voice, a conversation across centuries. Babylon is whispering to itself, and you've just walked into the archive. Babylonians wrote in cuneiform, one of the earliest writing systems in the world. Those little wedge marks were pressed into clay with a reed stylus, then baked or left to dry. Everything from kingly decrees to shopping lists ended up immortalized this way. To you, they might look like a jumble of scratches. To a trained scribe, they were law, literature, and life itself. You watch a scribe at work. He dips his reed into water, moistening the clay to keep it pliable, then begins pressing marks with practiced ease. His strokes are quick, decisive, no hesitation in his hand. He's recording grain rations for workers, columns of numbers and signs that will tell the temple exactly how many jars of barley went where. Bureaucracy has never looked so permanent. Nearby, a young apprentice stares hard at his own tablet, tongue sticking out in concentration. His signs are crooked, uneven, like a child learning cursive. He groans, wipes the clay smooth, and starts again. You can almost hear his future self sighing, "Why didn't I become a potter instead?" For a quirky tidbit, archaeologists once uncovered a tablet that turned out to be an ancient student's doodle sheet. In between practice rows of wedge marks, someone had sketched rough shapes of animals. Imagine a bored Babylonian teenager scribbling doodles while supposed to be memorizing grammar. It's oddly comforting, proof that procrastination is eternal. Historians still argue whether literacy was confined to a small elite or spread more widely through Babylon. Were scribes a rare, specialized class, or did merchants, craftsmen, even ordinary citizens learn to read enough to handle basic accounts? Some scholars argue writing was tightly guarded, like a secret art. Others point to casual notes and school tablets as evidence that more people dabbled in it. Standing here, watching the apprentices, you suspect the truth lies somewhere in the smudges between. You wander deeper into the building. The smell here is distinct. Damp clay, dust, faint oil smoke. Shelves line the walls, piled with tablets sorted by subject. You squint at a few and imagine the categories: laws, contracts, hymns, omens, recipes. A Babylonian librarian could probably tell you exactly which shelf holds complaints about copper deliveries versus omens involving sheep entrails. The latter category, by the way, took up more space than you'd think. Babylonian libraries contained astronomical records, medical texts, and even mathematical problems. Some tablets describe the movements of planets with astonishing accuracy. Others list cures for ailments, like if a man has a headache, crush willow bark and apply. Yes, they basically invented aspirin before aspirin. Practical science and divine ritual often blurred into one. And for the quirkier note, one surviving text is a list of household proverbs, including gems like, "He who has much silver may be happy, but he who has much barley can be happier." Essentially, catch is nice, but carbs rule. Somewhere in the stacks, a scribe probably copied it down while chuckling to himself, imagining future readers nodding knowingly. You pause at a table where two scribes mutter over a freshly written omen tablet. They've dissected a sheep earlier, studying the shape of its liver, and now they debate what the gods intended to say. One insists the lobe's curve means victory in battle. The other argues it predicts famine. Their voices rise, then fall into laughter. Historians still argue whether this was genuine belief or more like state-sponsored theater to guide political decisions. Standing here, you suspect it was both. Part faith, part strategy, all written neatly in cuneiform to make it official. At the back of the room, you find a row of older, cracked tablets. Their marks faded, but still legible. One contains part of the Epic of Gilgamesh, the great Mesopotamian story. You run your fingers over the ridges, imagining someone thousands of years ago tracing the same words. Gilgamesh, wandering, seeking immortality. His story carried from scribe to scribe until it landed here, waiting for you. The Epic of Gilgamesh is one of the world's oldest surviving works of literature. Parts of it were preserved in Babylonian libraries, where scribes copied and recopied the tale for centuries. Its themes, friendship, mortality, the search for meaning, resonate even now. And here it lies, stacked alongside shopping lists and barley rations. high poetry and paperwork sharing the same shelf. For the quirky detail, some versions of the epic contain what might be one of history's earliest plot holes. A line describing a flood survivor suddenly contradicts earlier versions. Did a scribe accidentally mix in a different tradition, or did he simply copy too quickly and fudge the details? Scholars debate it endlessly, while you can't help but imagine that poor scribe muttering, "Nobody's gonna notice." Spoiler, everyone noticed! You step back into the courtyard, the lamplight spilling warmly across the clay tablets. The quiet scrape of styluses continues, steady, deliberate, unhurried. It's not dramatic, not loud, but it feels more permanent than the roar of markets or the chants of temples. Those fade with the day. These marks endure. Above, the stars glitter faintly, their patterns already charted by some scribe in one of these rooms. The hum of Babylon's bureaucracy and imagination hums with them, a reminder that while walls crumble and statues topple, words pressed into clay can outlast entire empires. You walk on, clay dust still clinging faintly to your fingers, carrying Babylon's library in your memory like a soft, steady whisper. The scent of clay and ink fades behind you as you step into a narrower lane, where the glow of lamps reveals the more practical side of Babylon's nightly life. The hum here is softer, punctuated by occasional shouts and the creak of wooden wheels rolling over stone. You're entering the city's trade quarter, where merchants and carriers keep the wheels of Babylon turning even after sunset. Barrels and crates are stacked along the street, many marked with symbols denoting their contents: dates, grains, woven mats, jars of oil. A man heaves a crate onto a cart pulled by a pair of oxen. The cart wobbles dangerously, the wheels groaning in protest. You hold your breath until it settles, marveling at the balance he maintains. Babylon's merchants must have had a lifetime of practice, or iron nerves. Mainstream historical fact, Babylon was a trade hub for Mesopotamia. Goods came from all directions: timber from the north, precious stones and metals from the mountains, and foodstuffs from the fertile countryside. The city's strategic location along the Euphrates allowed river transport, supplementing overland caravans, making it an economic powerhouse. Some quirky tidbit record a peculiar Babylonian custom. Merchants occasionally sent courtesy gifts to competitors, often cakes, beer, or small figurines. Supposedly, it was meant to ensure goodwill and avoid disputes over pricing. Imagine sending your rival a tray of cookies today with a note, "May your profits be as sweet as these." A diplomatic snack attack, Babylon style. Historians still debate just how structured these trade networks were. Some argue that central authorities tightly regulated commerce, taxing goods and dictating routes, while others suggest a more laissez-faire system, with merchants negotiating directly among themselves. You glance at the street: oxen pulling carts, merchants shouting prices, boys running errands. It feels like a mix of both, controlled chaos tempered with trust. You pause at a stall where a man sells small wares: ceramic bowls, reed mats, and even carved amulets. A curious child peers at a tiny figure of a protective spirit, fingers tracing the intricate lines. The man notices but says nothing, accustomed to inquisitive hands. You realize that trade in Babylon isn't just about survival. It's also about culture, symbolism, and the subtle spread of ideas. Nearby, a group of women haggles over jars of oil. They measure carefully, tilting the vessels to check weight and consistency. Every argument is precise, mathematical even. You imagine this isn't a casual quarrel. It's a form of negotiation learned over generations, a skill just as vital as navigating the canals or reading a tablet. For the quirky note, records show that some merchants experimented with return policies, though they were informal. A buyer dissatisfied with a damaged jar could return it the next day, though likely with a complaint written in neat cuneiform. Consumer Rights, Babylonian Edition. You smile at the thought of someone grumbling over a broken pot and scribbling an official complaint centuries before Yelp existed. The sounds of the quarter are punctuated by animals. Goats bleat as they are tethered for the night, while donkeys bray, impatient at their loads. Somewhere, a dog barks, chasing a rat that scurries too close to a stack of barley sacks. The street is alive, but in a quieter, methodical way. No drums, no hammers, just the steady rhythm of survival and commerce. You notice a young scribe at a stall, taking careful notes. He tallies the goods coming in and out, recording quantities and measurements. His reed stylus scratches softly against the clay, almost imperceptible, yet you recognize the importance. Without these records, disputes would spiral, trade would falter, and the careful balance of Babylonian commerce would collapse. You can practically see the invisible threads connecting every transaction, holding the city together. Babylonian merchants often used clay tokens and seals to guarantee trade deals. Each seal represented a person or a family business, a way of authenticating agreements before widespread literacy. In a sense, it was the precursor to contracts, checks, and even digital signatures. You trace a finger along the edge of a carved seal displayed at one stall, imagining the hands that pressed it into soft clay centuries ago. You pass a small shrine tucked between two shops. A simple figure of a minor god sits on a shelf, surrounded by offerings, crumbs of bread, a few dates, a drop of beer. Merchants and buyers alike pause here briefly, touching the figure with a fingertip or muttering a short prayer before continuing. Babylonian religion permeates all aspects of life, from palaces to canals to commercial lanes. And yet, even here, the night isn't purely practical. Children dart between carts, playing tag with joyous abandon. Their laughter rings out, high and carefree, reminding you that the city is alive not just because of trade, but because of its people. One boy slips on a loose stone, rights himself, and continues running, shouting encouragement to a friend. Life continues, chaotic, unpredictable, yet persistent. Historians still debate the role of women in Babylonian commerce. Some evidence suggests they managed shops, controlled small-scale trade, and even traveled to markets independently. Other sources imply they were more confined, mainly supervising family stalls. Walking through this lane, observing women negotiating with authority, you suspect the reality was flexible, depending on social status, wealth, and family connections. The further you walk, the more the street seems to wind, opening into small squares where carts are parked, fires smolder, and vendors rest. A faint breeze carries the combined scents of grain, baked bread, and herbs, mingling with distant notes of incense still drifting from the temple precincts. Babylon at night is a sensory tapestry. Sound, smell, and movement blending into one quiet, persistent hum. You pause on a small bridge spanning a minor canal. The water below reflects the flickering lamps, creating tiny constellations on its surface. A boat passes quietly, laden with sacks of dates bound for the king's palace or a wealthy merchant. You watch it glide past, the oars dipping in rhythm with the canal's gentle current, and you feel the city's lifeblood moving beneath your feet. In this quarter, every object, every footstep, and every note of commerce contributes to Babylon's pulse. The city's grandeur is not only in ziggurats or gates, but in these quiet, tireless acts of trade and negotiation, in the rhythm of everyday life. You take a deep breath, letting the sounds and smells soak in, appreciating the subtle architecture of human diligence that supports the sprawling empire above. The hum of the trade quarter gradually fades behind you as you follow a narrow street lined with high walls, their mud brick surfaces catching the soft glow of scattered oil lamps. The lane narrows further, the air thickening with warmth and the faint, sweet aroma of dates left to ripen in the night air. You sense that you've wandered into the domestic artisan district, a quieter but no less industrious part of Babylon. Here, craft and creativity form the invisible scaffolding of the city's life. Potters work in low-lit courtyards, clay spinning on wheels beneath the faint glow of lamps. Their hands move with practiced precision, coaxing shapeless lumps into sturdy vessels, some plain, some bearing geometric patterns. You watch a woman kneeling by a shallow basin, shaping small bowls with fingers that have known clay since childhood. The wheel hums, slow and hypnotic, and you imagine the countless hands that have done this exact work over centuries. Babylonian artisans were highly specialized. Pottery, weaving, metalwork, and stone carving each required years of training, often beginning in adolescence. Pottery kilns could reach temperatures sufficient to produce durable, vitrified clay, which is why so many Babylonian vessels survive today. You notice the faint reddish glow in a nearby kiln, and marvel at the engineering knowledge that allows heat to be controlled so precisely. Quirkier details suggest artisans occasionally embedded small charms into pottery, believing they would bring good fortune to the owner. You peer at a drying jar, imagining a tiny figurine of a protective spirit tucked in its base, unseen but silently vigilant. Perhaps that's why some pieces last so long, because luck was literally baked in. Historians still argue whether workshops were predominantly family-run or more formally organized by the state. Were these artisans mostly independent, selling to whoever could pay, or were many contracted to serve temples and palaces exclusively? Walking past workshops with both humble and larger setups, you sense the truth lies somewhere in the middle, a mixture of personal enterprise and civic necessity. A short distance ahead, the metallic clink of hammer on anvil draws your attention. Blacksmiths work late into the night, shaping bronze and copper with precision. Sparks fly as a young apprentice leans over a small blade, hammering rhythmically while a master guides his strokes. The heat from the forge radiates across the courtyard, warming the air and adding a faint scent of singed metal to the mix of aromas. Nearby, a reed weaver crouches on the ground, intertwining strips into mats destined for roofs or baskets. The pattern is simple but effective, an ancient skill honed through repetition and observation. You marvel at the patience required, each reed carefully aligned, each strand a small victory of human ingenuity over material stubbornness. Mainstream fact was a common household and commercial activity in Babylon. Linen and wool were primary materials, and weaving techniques ranged from simple mats to intricate textiles, sometimes dyed with natural pigments like indigo or madder. You imagine the vibrant colors these artisans achieved, a visual symphony hidden within the everyday objects of life. A quirky aside, tablets mention workers occasionally marking their mats or cloth with tiny symbols, perhaps as a signature or personal flourish. You picture a clever artisan slipping a small animal design into a weave, a playful secret only they would know, much like a medieval mason hiding a carved face in a cathedral. You move on past a small courtyard where a jeweler bends over tiny beads of lapis lazuli, arranging them into necklaces for sale or temple offerings. Each bead catches the lamplight, glowing like a star captured in clay. You notice a young apprentice trying to thread a bead, dropping it repeatedly, muttering soft curses in frustration. Even in a city as organized as Babylon, human imperfection endures. Historians still argue how widely such decorative arts were accessible. Were jewelry and luxury goods primarily for the elite, or did ordinary citizens sometimes enjoy small pieces of ornamentation? Observing the variety of beads and trinkets on display, you suspect there was room for both, with sophistication depending on wealth, taste, and perhaps a touch of daring creativity. The street narrows even further, forming a corridor of workshops tucked side by side. The soundscape is varied. The rhythmic clatter of looms, the scraping of knives against wood, and the gentle tap-tap of chisels on soft stone. You pause to appreciate the orchestration, chaotic in content, harmonious in effect. It's a nocturnal symphony composed entirely by human hands. A woman works quietly on a small wooden box, carving intricate designs that will eventually be filled with offerings or personal possessions. She stops, inspecting her work in lamplight, then resumes, every cut precise and deliberate. Nearby, a boy watches her, learning the craft. This is how knowledge is transmitted, slowly, carefully, hand to hand, generation to generation. Quirky detail again, some boxes discovered by archaeologists contain tiny hidden compartments, presumably for secret notes or charms. You imagine a Babylonian teenager slipping a small token inside, perhaps a love note or a cheeky doodle, much like modern kids hiding letters in textbooks. Mainstream fact: artisans often combined multiple skills. A potter might also carve decorative elements. A weaver might dye textiles. A metalworker might etch patterns onto bronze. Specialization existed, but versatility was prized. You glance at the cluster of workshops and see evidence of overlapping skills, a testament to human adaptability. The night air carries the soft hum of conversation. Artisans discuss techniques, gossip about patrons, and occasionally joke about a stubborn apprentice or a kiln that refuses to cooperate. The humor is quiet but persistent, a gentle reminder that work need not be joyless. Babylon's craftsmen understood the delicate balance between labor and leisure, precision and play. As you step further down the lane, the combined sense of clay, metal, and herbs linger, a sensory fingerprint of Babylonian ingenuity. The night feels alive, not because of spectacle, but because of these quiet, persistent acts of creation. Every vessel, mat, or necklace is a story, a mark of someone's hands and patience, enduring long after the lanterns burn low. You leave the artisan district behind, stepping onto a wider lane where the glow of the city seems gentler, almost meditative. The sounds here are more subdued, occasional laughter, the scrape of sandals against compacted earth, the distant ripple of water in small canals feeding into courtyards. You've wandered into an area where leisure and ritual intermingle, the quieter pulse of Babylonian nightlife. Ahead, you notice small courtyards where families sit on mats, sharing the evening's final meal or chatting quietly before sleep. A mother feeds her child bread soaked in a sweet, thick sauce made of dates, while an older sibling watches over a small clay lamp flickering between them. The smoke curls upward in lazy spirals, carrying with it the smell of roasted grain and warm mud walls. You pause for a moment, imagining the countless nights this simple ritual has repeated in Babylon, a comforting anchor against the chaos of city life. Mainstream historical fact often had communal meals in their courtyards. Family members, and sometimes extended kin, would gather to share bread, stew, and beer. Food was not merely sustenance, but a social glue, reinforcing relationships and hierarchies within the household. These evenings were small, deliberate celebrations of survival and routine. For a quirky aside, tablets reveal that some Babylonian families kept little household gods or figurines of protective spirits tucked beside the cooking area, hoping to bless the meal and keep pests, or worse, away. Imagine reaching for a spoon and accidentally tipping over a tiny clay demon. The child would probably giggle, and the adult might mutter, "Again? That one is mischievous tonight." You picture the same mixture of reverence and humor repeating in homes for generations. Historians still debate the extent to which religion was integrated into daily household life. Were these rituals deeply spiritual or mostly performative?
Did families genuinely believe in the protective power of figurines, or was it an inherited tradition maintained for propriety? As you watch a small family bow their heads before a tiny altar, you sense that, like most things in Babylon, the answer lies in a blend of both faith and habit.
A few steps ahead, you hear the soft strumming of a lyre. The musician sits cross-legged on a mat, fingers gliding across strings with quiet skill. A young girl sways gently, humming along, her eyes closed. Music seems to flow naturally through Babylonian life, accompanying feasts, rituals, or even quiet evenings like this. The melody is simple, repetitive, almost hypnotic, perfectly suited to the night's languid rhythm. Nearby, a small fountain trickles, sending droplets into a stone basin that glows under the torchlight. The water's sound is delicate, steady, almost like a lullaby. You lean closer to the basin, letting the droplets strike your ears with a soft plink, imagining that this same fountain has whispered to countless generations, each one finding comfort in its modest cadence. Babylonians engineered complex waterworks, including canals, aqueducts, and small fountains, to manage the Euphrates flow. Water wasn't just functional, it was also aesthetic, a source of relaxation and spiritual significance. You can see why even the humblest courtyard or public space included flowing water. It was both life-sustaining and meditative. Quirkier detail, some tablets suggest people sometimes held miniature water festivals in courtyards, letting tiny boats drift along channels while children played, almost like scaled-down versions of the grand temple rituals. You imagine a father adjusting a reed boat for his daughter, carefully guiding it past the small stone bridges, both of them laughing as the water nudges it off course. A few steps further, you notice older men sitting together, quietly debating. They speak softly, but with conviction, gesturing with fingers as if their hands shape the words in the air. Perhaps they argue over a recent harvest, the price of grain, or local politics. You overhear a snippet mentioning the king's latest decree. It's gentle and unhurried, the kind of conversation that carries authority without shouting, the wisdom of age and experience flowing naturally into the rhythm of nightly life. Historians still argue how much influence ordinary citizens had on civic decisions. Were these discussions simply ritualized gossip, or did they hold genuine sway over local trade, neighborhood disputes, or temple offerings? You glance around at the attentive faces, noting nods and careful gestures, and suspect that while their power may have been limited, these conversations mattered in shaping day-to-day life. Nearby, a pair of young women carefully dye cloth using natural pigments. Indigo and saffron swirl together in shallow basins, producing muted colors that will become garments or decorative panels. The air smells faintly of herbs, water, and earth, and you notice how each brushstroke seems deliberate, meditative. This is craft as a nightly ritual, a subtle dance of concentration and rhythm. Mainstream fact, textile production was a common household activity, often conducted by women. Natural dyes came from plants, minerals, and insects, requiring extensive knowledge to achieve consistency. Cotton, wool, and flax fibers were all treated carefully, producing fabrics that could be worn, traded, or gifted. Quirkier tidbit, a tablet once instructed a weaver to sing to the threads to encourage them to behave. Whether meant literally or figuratively, you can't help but smile at the notion of Babylonian craftswomen quietly serenading their fabrics under lantern light. Perhaps it worked, or perhaps it simply made the long, repetitive work more bearable. The lane curves again, leading to a tiny shrine nestled against a wall. A figure of Ishtar, her features worn smooth by time, stands beside a small clay jar of offerings. People passing by bow or place small tokens before moving on. The ritual is quiet and informal, almost imperceptible against the hum of the neighborhood.
Yet its presence is a reminder that even casual devotion threads through Babylonian life, from palaces to quiet streets. Finally, you step onto a slightly elevated platform where a few men and women sit quietly, gazing at the stars above. The night air is cool, carrying a gentle breeze that rustles leaves and swirls dust into soft patterns. Some point out constellations, mapping tales of gods and heroes across the sky. The stories feel eternal, familiar, comforting, a night sky unchanged despite centuries of city life below. Historians still debate how much ordinary Babylonians understood of astronomy versus relying on priests for interpretation. Were the stars guides, omens, or simply decoration? You stare upward at the glimmering canopy, feeling the same awe ancient eyes must have felt, and accept that wonder needs no precise explanation. The gentle pulse of evening in this district, the smell of earth and resin, the soft sounds of water, music, and murmured conversation all combine into a calming rhythm. Babylon isn't just a city of walls and gates tonight. It's a living, breathing network of homes, workshops, and hearts, beating quietly under the stars. Leaving the domestic courtyards behind, you wander toward the outskirts of the city, where the streets widen and the hum of Babylon begins to mingle with the natural rhythm of the surrounding land. The sound of flowing water grows louder as the main canal comes into view, its surface reflecting torchlight like molten gold. You step onto a small bridge, the stones warm from the day's sun, and pause to listen. The gentle rush of water, the soft quack of ducks, and somewhere far off, the faint bark of a dog echoing in the distance. The canal banks are lined with reeds, their tops swaying lightly in the evening breeze. Fishermen work in quiet groups, casting nets and pulling in what the river yields. Their movements are methodical, almost hypnotic. Each step and tug part of a choreography repeated countless nights. You watch one man haul in a net heavy with small fish, silver bodies glinting as they wriggle, then carefully tip them into a clay basket to be sold later. Mainstream historical fact, canals and waterways were crucial to Babylonian life, providing water for drinking, irrigation, transport, and fishing. The Euphrates and its network of canals allowed food and goods to move efficiently across the city and beyond, underpinning Babylon's prosperity. You notice the precision of their locks and sluices, a subtle engineering marvel still in operation after centuries. A quirky tidbit floats into your imagination. Some fish sellers reportedly use tiny clay charms to encourage the fish to appear in their nets. You laugh quietly to yourself. Charm or coincidence? The practice seems harmless, even whimsical. A fish glints under torchlight, and you swear it looks like it's winking at you, complicit in the joke. Historians still argue about labor organization along these canals. Were fishers independent, working the same stretches for years, or were they employed by temple complexes or wealthy merchants who controlled prime fishing grounds? Watching the quiet diligence of these men, you sense a combination: freedom to work, tempered by oversight and custom. You step down to the canal bank, feeling the moist earth under your feet. A woman tends to small clay pots of watercress and leeks, irrigating them carefully with a jug. The faint smell of fresh greenery blends with the earthy aroma of mud and river water. This small-scale cultivation reminds you that even in a city as monumental as Babylon, self-sufficiency matters. Ordinary citizens grew what they could near the water, supplementing what the market provided. Nearby, children splash in shallow water, laughing as their bare feet disturb the surface. One boy lifts a clay bowl, filling it with water to throw at his companion, and both erupt in giggles. You remember seeing similar games in courtyards earlier tonight, and realize the city's joy often emerges in these simple, playful moments. Some things, childhood, laughter, curiosity, remain unchanged across millennia. Babylonian children often played with improvised toys, small clay animals, spinning tops, miniature chariots, much like the boy you saw earlier with his clay bowl. Toys and games were not only for amusement, they also taught skills, from dexterity to strategy. You smile, imagining children practicing negotiation and problem-solving before they even reach adolescence.
For the quirky detail, one tablet describes children playing a kind of water tag using floating reeds as markers. You watch the reeds drift lazily in the canal and can almost see the game unfolding under the torchlight, participants squealing and ducking as if caught by invisible spirits. Play in Babylon seems both ancient and timeless. You move along the bank toward a small boat moored in the shallow water. The boat is simple, wooden, and painted with faint designs that have faded over time. A man sweeps out the interior, preparing it for tomorrow's trip to the markets or temple districts. You imagine these boats carrying everything from fish and vegetables to clay tablets and even ceremonial offerings. They are lifelines, moving silently through the night. Historians still debate whether these small boats were owned privately or managed communally by guilds and temple authorities. Records exist suggesting both, hinting that while some families maintained their own vessels, larger operations were coordinated through more official channels. Watching the man work, it seems both approaches could coexist seamlessly. A short distance away, a group of women draws water from a canal-side well, their robes brushing against one another in the close quarters. They chat softly, laughter punctuated by the gentle splash of water as they fill clay jars. Some of these jars will go directly to kitchens. Others will travel to markets, carrying the product of their labor. Their rhythm is steady, measured, almost musical, echoing the flow of the canal itself. You pause to admire the reflection of torchlight on the water. Tiny ripples distort the image of nearby buildings, turning them into a shimmering, dreamlike scene. Across the canal, the outline of a distant ziggurat rises, faintly illuminated by lingering torches along its base. Even from here, you feel the enormity of Babylon pressing gently against the horizon, a reminder that no matter how far you wander, the city's heartbeat is never far away.
Quirky note, some Babylonian texts hint that canal banks sometimes served as informal bulletin boards. Merchants would leave clay tokens or inscriptions for others, communicating prices, warnings, or gossip. You imagine stepping across the bridge tomorrow morning and discovering a tiny message etched into clay. Perhaps a playful note from a fish seller to a friend, blending commerce with creativity. The night air carries a hint of smoke from distant hearths and forges, blending with the river's earthy smell. Occasionally, you hear the flapping of birds, returning to roost after foraging in the fields beyond the city walls. Ducks and geese move noisily in the shallow edges of the canal, their feathers slick and glistening in torchlight. The combination of natural and human sounds creates a soft nocturne, a lullaby for the city itself. As you continue along the bank, you notice small makeshift platforms where merchants have temporarily docked their goods. Clay jars, woven baskets, and bundles of reeds are stacked carefully, ready to be loaded onto boats at first light. You admire the orderliness, the way the city's commerce persists quietly at night, even as most residents sleep. Babylon thrives not only through grand monuments, but through the meticulous, patient work of countless hands. Finally, you step back from the water's edge and climb a small rise to overlook the canal. The reflection of lamplight, the silhouettes of boats, and the distant outline of ziggurats create a tableau of quiet majesty. The canal flows steadily, a lifeline threading through the city, carrying sustenance, communication, and even fragments of dreams. You take a deep breath, letting the night air fill your lungs, feeling the rhythm of Babylon beneath your feet, and the soft pulse of life flowing all around. You leave the gentle canal banks behind, stepping onto a broader avenue that leads toward the famed city gates. The street is wider here, the mud brick walls of buildings taller, their edges softened by the glow of oil lamps. The air carries a mix of scents: dust from the road, faint incense from a distant shrine, and the lingering aroma of bread and roasted grains drifting from small homes. It feels like Babylon's pulse has shifted again, from quiet domesticity and river life to the energy of the city's thoroughfares.
Along the avenue, guards sit or lean against walls, keeping a watchful eye on the comings and goings. Their posture is relaxed but alert, a quiet tension underlying their stillness. Some chew small sticks of reed, others fiddle with the straps of their leather armor. You notice a bronze-tipped spear resting nearby, catching the torchlight. Babylon's defenses are formidable, yet unassuming at this hour, a silent assertion of order over potential chaos. Mainstream historical fact: Babylon was famous for its fortifications. Massive walls, some stretching over 50 feet high, protected the city from invaders. Gates were reinforced, strategically placed, and manned by soldiers who also doubled as city administrators. Even during the night, the presence of guards reminded citizens and travelers alike that security was woven into the very fabric of urban life. Some records suggest that guards occasionally participated in informal competitions, testing their archery or wrestling skills between shifts. Imagine a torch-lit wrestling match behind the Ishtar Gate, soldiers rolling and laughing in the dust, while a fellow guard referees with a smirk. Discipline and camaraderie intertwined in ways that were both practical and human. Historians still debate the level of autonomy granted to guards. Did they operate strictly under the king's command, or were they given latitude to enforce rules as they saw fit? Observing the relaxed yet attentive manner of these men, you sense that their authority balanced between strict duty and practical discretion. You continue walking, passing shops that cater to travelers and merchants. Clay jugs of oil, small bundles of herbs, and woven baskets line the street. Some stalls are shuttered for the night, their goods safely stored. Others remain open, offering a quiet transaction to the rare late wanderer. You notice a vendor polishing a brass lamp, its surface gleaming under torchlight, reflecting tiny fragments of the city around him. Mainstream fact in Babylon was limited but not non-existent. Certain essential goods, oil, bread, water, remained available, often supplied by smaller, family-run stalls. This allowed travelers, laborers, or late-night craftsmen to sustain themselves without waiting for dawn. For a quirky aside, you recall a tablet listing unusual items sold after dark. Tiny charms for luck, small clay figurines, even packaged herbs meant to ward off nightmares. It seems Babylonians had a sense of whimsy and practicality, preparing both their bodies and minds for the night ahead. A few steps further, you notice a street musician tuning a lyre, softly plucking strings. The melody is slow, hypnotic, threading through the lamplit avenue and mingling with the occasional bark of a dog or the scrape of a cart. A young girl sits nearby, fingers tapping in rhythm, entranced by the gentle music. You pause to take it in, the way sound shapes space, weaving comfort and continuity across the city's streets. Historians still debate the role of entertainment in Babylonian public spaces. Was music primarily ritualistic, tied to temples and festivals, or was it an everyday pleasure, a companion to ordinary life? From what you witness here, it seems to permeate both worlds, subtle, unassuming, yet emotionally resonant. You round a corner and encounter a small open courtyard where travelers rest for the night. Reed mats are laid out, some occupied by weary merchants, others by young apprentices dozing quietly. The smells of travel, sweat, leather, bread combine with the softer aroma of night-blooming flowers tucked into clay pots. You notice a donkey tethered to a post, munching on scraps of straw while a boy strokes its flank, whispering reassurances for its patience. Mainstream fact, inns and way stations were common along major Babylonian roads and within the city for travelers and traders. They offered basic meals, resting spaces, and safety for both humans and animals, supporting the constant movement of people and goods. A quirky tidbit, some travelers left clay tokens or small notes behind, akin to a miniature guest book, marking their journey and perhaps leaving messages for those who would follow. You imagine centuries later, an archaeologist finding one of these tokens and puzzling over the personal story behind a small mark of clay. The avenue begins to narrow as you approach the city's gates. Massive, decorated with glazed bricks depicting lions and dragons, the gates exude power and ceremony. Torches flicker in wall-mounted brackets, highlighting the intricate patterns and the bright blues and golds of the enamel. You pause to admire the artistry, imagining how the bricks would shimmer under the noonday sun, a bold statement to anyone approaching the city.
Historians still argue how much of this decoration was symbolic versus functional. Did the images of lions and dragons serve purely as intimidation for enemies, or were they also meant to convey Babylonian cosmology and divine protection? You gaze at the reliefs, noticing the flowing manes and sinuous bodies, and realize it was likely both, a visual language of power, awe, and meaning.
A guard at the gate nods to you, gesturing toward the street beyond, where the last of the night's traffic winds slowly out of the city. Caravans of donkeys laden with goods shuffle past. Travelers whisper as they pass, careful not to disturb the quiet guardians of the gate. The scene is orderly yet alive, a delicate balance of movement and stillness. Quirky detail, some travelers reportedly left small offerings at the base of gate reliefs for safe passage or a smooth journey, ranging from coins to clay figurines. Imagine slipping a tiny figure into a niche before continuing on your way, an ancient roadside ritual for peace and protection. You step back and take in the full tableau. Torches flickering, guards alert but relaxed, merchants winding down, travelers resting, and the great gate looming like a sentinel over the city. Babylon's grandeur isn't just in its walls or ziggurats, it's in these carefully maintained rhythms of human life, in the intersection of labor, leisure, ritual, and travel. Finally, you begin to move past the gates, feeling the night air cool against your skin. The avenue opens to quieter streets, shadows stretching long in the torchlight. The city hums around you, not loud or insistent, but persistent, alive and patient. Babylon, in all its stone, mud, water, and human endeavor, carries on, weaving lives together in a tapestry that spans centuries, leaving you with a sense of calm continuity and quiet wonder. The streets beyond the gates are quieter now, the hum of commerce, craft, and domestic bustle fading into a gentle whisper. You stroll along a wide avenue lined with trees, their leaves rustling softly in the evening breeze, carrying a faint scent of damp earth and distant flowers. The city seems to exhale, the bright torchlight dimming into pools of soft golden illumination. Babylon at night has a rhythm all its own, less urgent than the day, yet equally alive. You notice families stepping into the evening, their routines unhurried. A mother smooths her child's hair, whispering words that dissolve into giggles. Nearby, a man guides a tired donkey along the path, its load jostling gently, the animal's bray muted under the calm of night. Children chase fireflies in small arcs, laughing as the glowing insects flicker past their fingertips. The scene is simple, domestic, but it feels sacred in its ordinariness. Babylonian life was structured around both work and family. Evenings were often spent in small-scale social and domestic rituals, meals, minor household chores, and personal devotion at home shrines. This slow, predictable rhythm helped stabilize daily life within the bustling metropolis, creating continuity amidst its grandeur. A quirky tidbit, some Babylonian households kept nighttime guardians, small clay figures placed near doors or windows, intended to protect the family while they slept. Imagine a row of tiny statues silently watching over the courtyard, their presence comforting, even if purely symbolic. You smile, realizing that every night, countless children and adults likely felt safer simply because of these miniature watchers. Historians still debate the prevalence and belief in these household figures. Were they genuinely considered protective, or were they more a traditional custom maintained out of habit? Observing families moving through the street, quietly bowing to small shrines, it seems the answer lies somewhere in between, a blend of faith, ritual, and reassurance. The avenue opens to a plaza where a fountain glistens under the moonlight, water spilling gently into a stone basin. The sound is soft, a consistent rhythm against the stillness of the night. A musician sits nearby, strumming a lyre, its delicate notes weaving through the air like a lullaby. A few travelers pause to listen, their faces softened in the glow of lamps, eyes reflecting the gentle movement of water. Mainstream fact, water features were common in Babylonian urban design. They provided not only practical irrigation and sanitation, but also aesthetic and spiritual benefits. The sound of flowing water was calming, an auditory reminder of continuity and life. You find yourself slowed by its gentle rhythm, your steps unconsciously syncing with the small ripples and musical notes. Quirkier note, tablets suggest some Babylonian citizens believed in whispering personal hopes or minor complaints into fountains at night, trusting the water to carry them to divine attention. You picture someone leaning close to the basin, murmuring a wish for a good harvest, or quietly hoping that the neighbor's goat doesn't eat their herbs. Even mundane concerns were entwined with ritual, lightening the weight of daily life. A short distance away, you encounter an open courtyard where neighbors gather quietly. Some are embroidering or weaving small textiles, others are seated on mats, murmuring conversations that float into the air like soft smoke. A few children play tag, their footsteps cushioned by the dust of the avenue. Every movement, sound, and scent contributes to the living rhythm of Babylon's nocturnal heartbeat. Historians still argue whether these nightly gatherings were common across all social classes or limited to certain neighborhoods. Observing this courtyard, with its mix of labor, play, and conversation, it seems probable that both ritualized and spontaneous social interactions coexisted comfortably, reinforcing community bonds. You wander to the edge of the plaza, where the city walls rise in their final prominence, bathed in soft moonlight. The gates, once gleaming in torchlight, are now silhouettes against the sky, guardians of a city whose pulse continues even as its inhabitants rest. You hear the faint creak of a cart returning to its stable, a dog trotting along a deserted street, and the soft murmur of a family saying a final goodnight to a small household deity. Babylonian city walls, gates, and towers served as both defense and statement of civic pride. Their enduring presence reinforced a sense of permanence and protection. Walking beneath them at night, you sense the combination of practical strength and symbolic reassurance they provided to the city's residents. Quirky tidbit, a small forgotten tablet once recorded a nighttime prank involving a clay figurine placed atop the city walls to surprise late watch guards. You imagine some mischievous soul carefully balancing the figure, watching silently as the guard nearly jumped, muttering curses under his breath. Even in a city of monumental structures, human playfulness persists. You find a quiet bench near the walls, the cool stone smoothing under your palms. Looking back at the illuminated streets, flickering lamps, and distant temples, you feel the calm spread gradually through your body. Babylon is monumental, yet intimate. Grand ziggurats tower overhead,
But small courtyards, canals, fountains, and workshops create the city's softer, enduring heartbeat. Every brick, reed, and clay tablet is threaded into the rhythm of life.
The night wind carries subtle hints of roasted grain, wet mud, incense, and herbs. Somewhere, a cat pads silently across the street, the brush of its fur soft against the stones. The distant hum of the Euphrates drifts upward, blending with the faint song of the lyre from the plaza. Even as the city sleeps, or seems to, its pulse continues, a quiet assurance of enduring life and continuity.
As you take your last steps through the plaza, the night seems to stretch comfortably around you. Lamps flicker, water ripples, faint conversations echo, and the stars overhead reflect off the canal in silvery patterns. Babylon, for all its history and human toil, is a city alive with gentle, persistent rhythms, each ordinary act contributing to an extraordinary whole.
Now, the city slows further. You lean back, letting the last impressions of light, sound, and scent settle into your mind. Every step, every ripple, every faintly flickering torchlight image becomes part of the gentle hum that carries you toward rest. The streets, canals, walls, and temples of Babylon recede into a comforting dreamscape. You take a deep breath, the cool night air filling your lungs, carrying the sense of earth, water, and faint incense. The city's hum softens around you, fading into a gentle, rhythmic whisper. You can almost feel the pulse of Babylon slowing to a heartbeat, steady, calm, unhurried. Every street you walked, every courtyard you passed, every lamp you glimpsed flickering into darkness becomes part of a quiet mosaic, soothing and familiar.
Your thoughts drift easily now, carried by the soft trickle of water from fountains, the gentle pluck of distant lyres, and the whisper of leaves in the evening breeze. The city feels protective, as if its walls, canals, and lamps themselves wrap around you like a soft, comforting blanket. Even the smallest details, the laughter of children, the hush of a mother feeding her child, the scrape of a potter's wheel, contribute to this quiet sense of peace.
The stars overhead, constant and unjudging, sprinkle light across the rooftops and avenues, reflecting off walls and canals in tiny, shimmering constellations. The hum of night, the scent of the city, and the warmth of human life settle together in a delicate rhythm. Babylon, grand and intimate, monumental and quiet, lulls you toward rest with its persistent, patient heartbeat.
You feel your body sink into relaxation, your mind softening, letting go of tension. The streets, the ziggurats, the canals, the workshops, and the homes all merge into one gentle, flowing memory. In this moment, Babylon is yours, and it is gentle, calm, enduring. Let the night carry you forward, letting the soft rhythm of the city guide you toward sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.